But at Kursk, none of them will matter unless Zhukov and his planners meet the next factor in the battle plan for defensive battle: concealment. Commanders must not simply conceal their defensive positions and their troops. Above all, they must also conceal their intentions. If the enemy know what the defensive battle planners are intending, they may not attack. And if they don't attack, the defenders cannot launch their own counterstrike. At Kursk, concealment is vital. If von Manstein knows what Zhukov is planning, the chances are that he won't attack. Zhukov uses false troop concentrations to mislead the enemy. But he also has to conceal the troops he will use for his counterattack, and their artillery and tanks.
They did this in all sorts of ways, by using camouflage netting, by digging holes, even caves, to hide tanks and trucks. And also, they were very keen to hide the trails that led to the front line. Whole battalions of men worked day and night to ensure that the Germans did not get wind of their preparations, and this held their counter-strike in very great stead for the future.
Within this, one factor is crucial: control of the air. If the Luftwaffe can overfly, they can see the preparations Zhukov is putting in place. By 1943, however, the Germans are finding it difficult to control the air over any part of their fighting fronts. On the Eastern Front, as Zhukov prepares for defensive battle, the Soviets begin putting massive numbers of aircraft into the sky, not simply to ensure that the Germans cannot dominate the skies to support their assault, but also to stop the Germans spying on Soviet developments and plans. On the Hindenburg Line in World War I, on the other hand, where the intention is to deter the enemy from attacking, or at least to delay his attack in order to buy time, concealment is not a requirement. On the contrary, the more the enemy sees how difficult and costly the defenses will be to overcome, the more likely he is not to attack, or at least to delay. The Hindenburg Line on the Western Front, November 1917, and the winter is about to close in. Kursk on the Eastern Front, July 1943, and the summer is already hot and dusty. The strikes are about to go in. It is the moment when defending commanders come face to face with the weaknesses of their battle plans for defensive battle. Psychology. The defending troops must not know why they are being asked to possibly sacrifice themselves. They also must not know a counterattack is planned in case they are captured by the advancing enemy. At Kursk, it is this psychological factor which might have had a negative effect, but Zhukov makes it a positive.
The Soviet Union were fighting the Great Patriotic War. It was a war in which both the soldiers and the civilians were asked to make very great sacrifices. This is very clearly seen during the preparations for the Battle of Kursk. The massive defensive network, the like of which had never been seen in the Second World War, was constructed not just by military personnel, but also by hard-working civilians that were caught within that salient.
But in World War I, at Cambrai, it is the other weak point in the plan for a defensive battle which threatens von Hindenburg. High risk. When developing a battle plan for defensive battle, a commander does not know the enemy's intentions, or what the enemy has in his arsenal, or the surprises the enemy might have in his own battle plan. Now the time has come when von Hindenburg in World War I and Zhukov in World War II must put their battle plan to the test. Now is the time when the enemy will attack. November 20th, 1917, 0619. the morning is silent. Traditionally, an attack is preceded by several days of bombardment. This warns defenders that an offensive is on the way. But the early morning of November 20th, 1917 is still silent. The German defenders do not expect an attack. Then, 0620, the British offensive begins. 300 tanks lead 6 infantry divisions. A 1,000-gun barrage opens up. Smoke, high explosive, and shrapnel rain down on German positions. 14 squadrons of the Royal Flying Corps harass German ground forces. The German defenders are taken totally unaware by the onslaught. They are not anticipating tanks, even though the British had used them a year earlier on the Somme.
There is no doubt that the Germans were surprised by the Cambrai attack. The way in which the British used new infantry tactics, together with the surprise use of tanks and also the great massing of artillery pieces, meant that they really had to hold their nerve because the British immediately made a dent in the German front line.
It is the moment when Field Marshal von Hindenburg must meet the next requirement in the battle plan for defensive battle. Absorb attack. The defending troops and the defensive positions the commanders have planned must be able to withstand and absorb the enemy attack, especially when it's at its most ferocious. The British tanks tear through the seemingly impregnable defenses. By 0800, less than 2 hours after the start of the offensive, the British overrun the main Hindenburg line. By 11:30 hours, most of the German support line is taken. By mid-afternoon, the British have advanced an incredible 9,000 yards, not accomplished in 4 months of fighting during the Third Battle of Ypres.
The defensive battle at Cambrai was initially actually a great British success. When the British advanced on the first day of their offensive, the British church bells rang out in victory for the first time in the First World War. It looked as though the Germans were collapsing.
But von Hindenburg's defensive battle plan is already beginning to work. The British are held up in the center of the front. Slow-moving tanks suffer heavy losses from those German guns not destroyed by the British artillery. The vital breakthrough has not been achieved. On day 1, the British suffer 4,000 casualties, but they do have reinforcements available. Crucially, however, they also lose 179 tanks, and these cannot easily be replaced. And during this time, the German defensive positions are doing their key job, slowing down the British advance enough to allow von Hindenburg's generals to bring in reinforcements for the next stage of his battle plan, the counterattack. Kursk, July 1943. German forces are poised to launch Operation Citadel. Unlike von Hindenburg at Cambrai, Soviet Marshal Zhukov knows not only that an attack is planned, he knows its details and its start time, and plans against it. Zhukov is in total control of the intelligence requirement of the battle plan for defensive battle, and exploits his advantage mercilessly. Hitler's Operation Citadel is due to begin at 0300 hours on July 5th, with a massive artillery barrage. 3 days before, Zhukov receives intelligence detailing the timing from the Lucy espionage network. The intelligence is confirmed by German deserters and prisoners. At 0220 hours on July 5th, just before the Germans' barrage, Zhukov unleashes his own. Zhukov considers that the psychological impact of this is so important that he uses up more than half his stock of shells for this part of the battlefield in one night. In the first hours of their barrage, the Germans use more shells than in the Polish and French Blitzkrieg campaigns combined. Then, at 05:30, they unleash Operation Citadel. In the north, soldiers of General Model's 9th Army emerge from their battered holes and advance. Behind them come the tanks. Screaming Stuka dive bombers cover them overhead. Fighting is ferocious, hand to hand. The Soviet defensive system shows signs of cracking. 2 Red Army divisions crumble under the Panzer attacks. Fearing a breakthrough, the Soviets order massive airstrikes. During the first day, Model's men advance some 6 miles along a 20-mile front. But Soviet General Rokossovsky has merely pulled back to Zhukov's 2nd defensive belt. In the south, General Hoth's 4th Panzer Army faces similar conditions. Heavy rain during the night and most of the first day make it hard to cross rivers and streams, slowing both tanks and infantry. And the Soviet battle plan is given an unexpected advantage. The new German tanks, which Hitler had waited for, arrive just in time. But the rush to production leads to problems in the field. Many of these powerful tanks prove unreliable in battle, breaking down or bursting into flame when their engines overheat. Despite this, on day 1, some of Hoth's troops penetrate as deep as 7.5 miles. But 40 of the 140 miles still separating the 2 prongs of the German pincer movement are similarly heavily defended. It is Soviet Marshal Zhukov's turn to meet the absorb attack requirement in the battle plan for defensive action. For 6 days, his battle plan for defensive battle appears to be holding. But then, it seems that a small crack begins to form. German General Hoth, unable to advance north, switches his attack east, toward the village of Prokhorovka. The attack, spearheaded by the elite SS Adolf Hitler and Death's Head Panzer Grenadier divisions, captures its first targets, 2 hills on the road to Prokhorovka. Then it heads for a breakthrough. Zhukov knows he has to halt the panzer push toward Prokhorovka and orders his armor in. The first Soviet tanks meet the crack SS Adolf Hitler division at 0400